So this morning we have a breakfast that's going to feature on the Rental Housing Supply Coalition. We're fortunate to be joined by two of the co-chairs. So they're going to be addressing the shortage of affordable rental housing in Metro Vancouver. So first, I'm pleased to introduce Mayor Wainwright. He's Mayor of the City of New Westminster. He's co-chair of the Rental Housing Supply Coalition, and he's also chair of Metro Vancouver's Housing Committee. And we also have with us Maureen Enser. Maureen is director of the Urban Development Institute, and she is co-chair of the Rental Housing Supply Coalition as well.
It's a great privilege to be here this morning talking to you about rental housing. So first of all, let me start off the session today by letting you know who's actually a member of the coalition to date. We have a good cross-section of private, public, and nonprofit organizations, including the BC Apartment Owners and Managers Association, the Canadian Home Builders Association of BC, and the Greater Vancouver Home Builders Association, the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver, Van City Enterprises, and my own organization, the Urban Development Institute. And albeit that the problem in the region with rental housing is more acute here in this region, this is a national challenge, and we hope to expand the coalition over the coming months. We are taking our message right across the country because we do believe that a lot of the solutions to our current situation actually rest with federal tax policy, and you'll hear more about that later. And Wayne?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. And you know, it's always a wake-up call for me when I come down into Vancouver from New Westminster, because I take the SkyTrain constantly, and I see all the young people, and I see the people who are coming into the city to work. And when you look at them and you see some of them are nodding off to sleep, some of them are sitting there, and you can see that there's a little bit of anticipation of what's going to happen that day with them. And probably some of it is where they live or where they aren't living. And so what we've come to the agreement is that we've got to find something that's going to help the people in our city and across the country. So what we're putting together, this coalition, has never been done before in the manner that we're doing it. And we want to start it here in British Columbia, and we want to take it right across to Newfoundland. So today we're going to give you some of the ideas and some of the things that we're doing. Some of the other people in our coalition are the BC Apartment Owners and Managers Association, the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, which is the umbrella organization for all the nonprofits, the Co-op Housing Federation of British Columbia, also an umbrella for the co-ops in the province, Metro Vancouver, of course, and the Tract Tenants Resource and Advisory Center, which is the Advocates for Renters. So what we're doing is putting this group together along with the group that Maureen represents, and say, let's all do this, let's see what the problems are, and let's see how we solve them. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is that there's families with modest income, which the average total rental household income is $38,000. So these people are at risk. And when housing costs more than 30% of household incomes, money for other essentials is limited. Limited for all the things that you might need for a family or an individual, or for your education. There's about 80,000 renter households are spending 30% or more on housing costs. And about 31,000 rental households are spending 50% or more of income on housing costs, and they're considered at risk for homelessness. But either incomes have to go up or the rents have to come down. So the lack of affordable housing makes it difficult to maintain a visible workforce for the local economy. Now, service sector workers and low-wage working families cannot afford to live in the Lower Mainland. So students and the recent graduates starting out in the workforce, they have trouble finding decent, affordable housing. And affordable rental housing is needed for the increasing population of our seniors. The number of seniors seeking rental housing continues to increase, and it will continue to increase because that demographic bubble is here. And if we look in this audience today, including myself, we're part of that. But there's many of the people who don't have the same income levels and don't have the same backgrounds as some of us more fortunate ones are. In my day, when I was young, everybody had a home. When you started out, you might not have had the biggest homes as we experience today. 1,200 square foot would give you a family home. You could have 2 or 3 or 4 children in that size of a home. We didn't have the problems with work. All these things are adding up now to a limited amount of income coming into people and a difficulty in having their homes. So will the problem go away? No, it'll get worse for 3 reasons. Real income is not growing. The rental demand is high, and it's going to continue, and the rental supply is not being built and hasn't been built for many, many years. The annual demand is 6,500 new rental units, and about 5,000 of these are needed for households with incomes less than $45,000. So a large portion of the existing rental stock is at the end of its lifespan. And will the problem go away? There's a chart that you'll see here. Condo rentals, very few people can afford them, and they're 12% of their high rent. Basement suites are everywhere, but are they good? I constantly see people who are coming and sending me messages, can you come and help me? The electricity isn't working. The water isn't working. The doors don't open. The windows don't open. There's no heat in the place. We've got to do something with these secondary suites to make sure we can control them. There's social housing and then rental housing. The substandardness is just as bad as not having any rental. So why do we have the coalition? The problems can't be solved individually, and it can't be solved by a single level of government in isolation. It's up to all of us. Every single one of you sitting in this room can be a part of it. The private sector, the developers, the landlords, the nonprofit organizations, the tenants, the financial sectors, and all levels of government. If we do not fight this as it is a battle, we will not win it, and we have to start with it together. On the supply, we have 600 new purpose-built rental housing units built annually in the region over the last 5 years. 600. We said we needed 6,500. I think there's a little bit of discrepancy there. Now, the secondary suites provide some portion for the low-end rental demand, but the capacity is actually very limited. Condo rentals, as I said, they're available, but they're at the high end. And they're 20% higher or 40% than older purpose-built rentals, especially for large families. So I guess in general what I'd like to say is that from a municipal point of view, from Metro Vancouver's point of view, we want to work together. We want everyone in this room to participate and to help us put together this coalition so that the people back east and the people across this country will help us take this problem that's not for just New Westminster nor British Columbia, it's spread across the country. Thank you.
The affordability problem is not just limited to rental, and as this top figure shows you, it indicates that the average price of a detached home in Vancouver, this is not new housing, this is a blend of both. And if we were just to take out the new housing, you could add another $300,000 or $400,000 to that figure. But the average price of a new home is over $675,000. But when you consider that the median income in the area is under $63,000, you can see that we are really very expensive, beautiful, but expensive place to live. And we spend more than 9.5% of our income just on housing. As a reference point for you all, if you were to look at what would be affordable for the median income, you're probably looking at average house prices about $295,000. That would give you that a good comfort level to be able to live, work, play, and enjoy this wonderful place that we live in without too much pressure on your pocketbook. Vancouver does have the highest rental costs in the country. The trouble is we have a two-pronged problem. We have ownership costs continue to rise, and as that happens and it's more difficult for people to buy a home, to own a home, that puts more pressure on the need to supply more rental housing. So we cannot tackle this just by looking at rental housing. We have to look at the affordability of housing generally speaking. Housing is a continuum, so rental housing is a very important part of that continuum, and that's where the pressure is today. But in the long run, we have to look at ways of mitigating the costs, the impacts on housing at all levels so that we have a good blend. So we need to, the reason for reducing the cost of housing is not only because it's good for our pocketbook, but it's also good for the environment. When we have a lot of strain on housing, people will have to move further and further away to find decent, affordable place to live, further away from where they work. That puts extra pressure on commuting to and from work. That puts extra greenhouse gases in the air. We're all trying to avoid that, and we're trying to be sustainable. So part of what we're trying to achieve here today is not only looking after families and income, but also looking after the environment. On this next slide, this is a very telling story. One of my members who is a developer who builds in Toronto and Vancouver generously supplied this. I said, why is it that developers in Toronto can build rental, and we can't do it here in Vancouver. And if you just look at the very top line, you will see why. The biggest reason here in this region is the cost of land, which is basically about 3 times that of Toronto. You see, in Toronto you can buy land 50 to 60 a buildable. Here it's $140 to $150. We do live in a very beautiful place, but it's hemmed in. It's hemmed in by mountains, by the agricultural land reserve, by the ocean, and by the U.S. border. And 70% of the land in the region is already preserved. It's protected. It's in either an agricultural land reserve or it's in a green zone. And that last 30%, well, you look around, is pretty much built out. There's very few areas left for what we call greenfield development. As a result of that, that means we have to use whatever land we have left that's developable. We have to use it wisely and efficiently. And also we have to reconsider how we've built the cities of the past. So here are challenges. How do we make better use of the precious land that we do have in a way that actually contributes to the affordability of housing, makes this a very livable place? It's a big challenge that all of us at the region, at the local level, in the private sector, and all of you as citizens, we have to find a solution for. Moving on to the second category, hard construction costs are also significantly higher in Vancouver than in Toronto. There are many in the industry who believe that material costs, more complex building requirements that result in certain types of material, and a smaller labor force, that means that what you've got is more expensive, contribute to those costs. There are slightly higher revenues for housing in Vancouver, but not substantive enough to offset the increased costs. And you see, at the end of the day, you can make a return on your investment in Toronto rental of about 6%. Still pretty modest, but you know, if you are a pension fund and looking at a long-term horizon, it could make sense. Here, you can't make those numbers work. So those are the sorts of things that go into a decision by a developer to build purpose-built rental. Now, as I alluded to earlier, at the regional level, we want to all solve the housing problem, but when it comes to real projects at the local level, we're often faced with resistance from residents. And really, the elephant in the room, as I mentioned earlier, is that people do not like density, and they're very vocal about it to councils. Unfortunately, affordable housing isn't seen as an amenity by most people living in the community. They see it more as a burden to them. They're going to have more traffic and all these other, challenges. More people are going to share their amenities that they already have. So I think the challenge is we have to reframe the conversation around how we're going to accommodate people. Maybe density is such a negative word, we have to just totally eliminate it from the vocabulary. As for operating costs, most nonprofits and co-ops pay mortgages and receive subsidy payments through operating agreements with government. But these agreements will be maturing in the next 10 years. And many nonprofits with housing in good shape and market tenants are okay, they'll be fine. But for housing providers who house a significant number of low-income tenants, those who require a large rental subsidy to maintain affordability, it will be difficult to upgrade and maintain properties and keep these deep subsidies without government assistance once the agreement expires. And there will always be those who cannot be served by the market, and the private sector acknowledges this. And we know that they will need support and continue to need support through capital and operating fund assistance to new subsidized housing. The Rental Supply Coalition, all of us as members believe that an adequate supply of decent and affordable rental housing for a range of incomes is essential for the economic and social well-being of the region. But first of all, I want to acknowledge that local governments are very concerned about rental housing. And in the city of Vancouver, just as one example, they've introduced the STIR program, and that is the short-term incentives for rental housing. Now, this includes initiatives like rental property assessments on rental units so that you're not lumped in with strata assessments, development cost levy waivers, parking requirement reductions, discretion in unit size, increase in density, and expedited permitting process. This is a good start, but it cannot work alone. it needs the support of other tax policy changes, and specifically at the federal level. To me, the biggest challenge we face as a country in getting affordable housing built, whether it's rental or home ownership, the biggest challenge we face is we have not had a housing strategy in this country for many, many decades now. And as a result, housing has not been given due respect, I believe, in federal tax policy. In fact, tax policy has centered around how do we extract money from housing, not how do we create a viable housing stock in this country that'll actually support British Columbians and people living in Newfoundland or people living in Quebec. So I think the first priority would be to actually put emphasis again on the important role that housing plays, not only in shelter, but as an economic generator. We know that I can tell you, for every $1 million of investment in construction, in housing, we're creating 12 good-paying jobs. We're creating opportunities for people to live and work in decent, affordable, not only housing, but also, create communities that are viable. We need to look at the viability of the nonprofit and co-op housing sector. We need to create supply, but it does require the cooperation of all of us. So to be specific about some of these actions that we're looking at the federal level, we're asking the federal government to look at reinstating the ability to defer capital gains tax upon reinvestment in rental housing, to accelerate depreciation, to be able to deduct losses against other income. This is very helpful to smaller landlords. To permit the GST, HST zero rating or exemption. Right now, as a landlord, you have to pay the HST, you can't pass it through, but if you were able to zero rate it or exempt it, then that wouldn't put the burden on it. And we need to look at increasing the viability of the nonprofit co-op construction through direct capital investment and long-term low-cost financing. Now, not to leave out the provincial government, we were asking them to take, a leadership position in Canada along with us and promote some of our asks of the federal government in tax policy. They can also create incentives for the non-market affordable rental housing and looking at fair tax practices for rental properties. And that we need to revise the BC Assessment Authority practice to assess property tax on rental property based on a strata value. That alone will help significantly. And the usual things that we ask for: more land for rental housing. The government owns a lot of land. They are making it available. And we need their help to address income challenges for those earning less than $45,000. Rent supplements is a good thing.
I come from the era that when I was a young boy, there was a war on. And that war was the Second World War, and we were growing up in it. And there were no houses across this country. And what happened was they built a house a day. And then when the troops came home and the people moved from the farms into the cities to work, those houses were there for them. Those houses were supposed to be till the end of the war, then they were supposed to have been taken down. They're still there. They're still using them. They were still made well. Canadians can do it if we want. Canadians can put their minds to it and get this thing solved. But again, before I start here, it's you young people that have to look and say, what can you do? How can you make this force a place to reckon with our leadership, both in the federal and the provincial governments and the municipalities? So with the municipalities, the commitments that we can do is to facilitate the creation of more rental housing. And this is difficult for us because people are already into these houses. So how do we move them to put new housing in? And that's a struggle that we're working on now. We're going to review the strategies to reduce the cost to develop rental housing, which is including making land available. Most cities don't have a lot of land, but what they do have available, they will be looking at to see what can they share with us. Increasing densities. Densities is not a bad word. If done properly, density is not a bad word. It works, okay? And it works because if you look at seniors, most seniors live in a densified place. And they have wonderful homes because they're with each other, they're able to share costs, and it's a good lifestyle. And the rest of us have to realize that we have to share the spaces that we live here, especially on the West Coast. The reduced fees, charges, and regulatory requirements, these are in the codes of our laws and our bylaws in the cities. So we have to look at them individually and take care of them. Speeding up the development process, that's difficult. It's very difficult. It's easy to say, but there's so many rules in place that we have to look at them as individual councils and make sure that we can speed up our process for the rentals, because that's what costs money. Time is money. And then there should be some incentives. And I think Maureen has talked about these incentives that can come both from the federal and provincial governments. Now, the nonprofit sector commitment, and that's for them to help us to work with the private sectors and to work collectively to put that affordable housing in place. And it should be a component. Rental housing should be a component of our entire housing situation and system in Canada. And we should have a national housing strategy that includes rental housing, and nonprofit and cooperative housing as the components of that. And that's what we're putting together now, so that when we go back east, when we talk to the federal government, we'll actually have an ask in place that'll show them that it can work.
Yeah. I do think this issue around density, we have to sort of reframe the conversation. We actually have to give people a lifestyle choice, not just that deal with, density and more people living in your neighborhood. From our sector, the private sector, we are absolutely 100% committed to finding practical and economically viable ways of building high-quality rental housing to meet the needs of all British Columbians. That's our kids, and I'm of a generation too, grandkids, and our parents, our seniors, people who are looking for assisted living situations. We need to be able to accommodate everybody in society in a way that's respectful. So we're going to continue to look for innovations, not only in design and financing and development opportunities, but we're going to look at innovations in ways we can work collaboratively together. One thing we are going to continue to do is we're going to continue to encourage all levels of government to make housing a priority and remove especially the tax impediments and regulatory obstacles that will enable us all to work more collaboratively to create more housing. So we're going to do a call to action, and this is where we need your help.
I think one of the things that I wanted to go back, and we think that we live in the most lovely city in the world, and we do. But in the world, we were voted #1, except a lot of the people who are here can't appreciate it because they don't have the right living accommodations. So although we live in a beautiful spot, we have to make sure that it's acceptable for everyone, because it'll make the lifestyles for all of us to be better. So this coalition has come together, and we're going to advocate for the changes that will stimulate rental housing, adequate rental housing, and something that we wouldn't be ashamed to live in, and one that we wouldn't be afraid to have our children grow up in. That's the goal. So individually we can fight for change, but individuals are very difficult to get anything that happens. You need to be collectively together. And so this room today, and the people that are sitting here today, we're asking you, join with us, be part of it, because every little voice that comes together is a large scream. So we want to get to have all of us doing that together. So we're asking for your support, and we want you to join with us in any manner that you can through your organizations, and let us know what you can do, and we'll be there with you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I just wanted to leave with another story. This is another real life story, and this relates to San Diego back in the mid-1990s, and UDI was asked to come down by council to take a look at the downtown area around Horton Plaza and the waterfront in San Diego. And the problem that was, San Diego's a beautiful city, but it was starting to reach urban decay status. And what was happening is the people who were working in the banks, the taxi drivers, the people who were the service workers, the office workers, could no longer afford to live close to where they worked. And so they were commuting many times an hour and a half, 2 hours a day to find an affordable place to live. And the jobs that they were working in were not high-paying jobs. So what ended up happening was that people ended up finding work closer to where they could afford to live, which left people, the stores, the offices, empty. They had no workforce. So we went down there and we were asked by council to take a look at the situation. We could identify the problems right away: high land costs, high regulatory costs, no commitment to making sure that there was housing available for all the workers in the community. So I guess the grass is always greener. So council listened to us, even though their own development community had been telling these things for years. And so we went down there and helped them identify things that they could do to reduce housing costs. And today, if you go down to San Diego, you take a look around there, if you look at all those wonderful buildings, they're basically built by Vancouver developers who went down and invested in San Diego. So the moral of the story is that we need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to housing costs because it influences every aspect of our lives. It influences where we're able to work. You know, we have to pay attention to these dynamics because housing is important. It is critical. When we go and promote a rental housing, either councils come up with a housing plan or the industry comes up with a plan to build housing. We need people to say, yes, rental housing is important to this community. Let's make it happen.
Thank you. So I think at this point we would like to thank both Maureen and Wayne for the fabulous presentation, the generous amount of your time. This was just fascinating. I think we're going to have to bring this back. There's obviously a lot of interest in this topic. So a big round of applause for Wayne and Maureen.
You can call us at 604-436-6794 or email us at sustainableregion@metrovancouver.org.